The dusty streets of Copper Ridge, Texas, buzzed with excitement as carriages rolled into town for the annual Cattlemen's Ball. It was the most prestigious social event of the year, where ranchers, businessmen, and their families gathered to celebrate another successful cattle season. The grandest families from 3 counties would be in attendance, their wives and daughters adorned in the finest silks and most dazzling jewelry money could buy. Sarah Mitchell stood at the window of the small boarding house where she worked, watching the elegant procession pass by, her calloused hands pressed against the glass as she observed the glittering display of wealth. Diamond necklaces caught the late afternoon sunlight, emerald earrings swayed with each graceful step, and gold bracelets chimed like tiny bells as ladies stepped down from their ornate carriages. At 23, Sarah possessed a natural beauty that needed no enhancement. Her auburn hair caught fire in the sunlight, and her green eyes held a depth that spoke of intelligence and kindness. But in a world where worth was measured by the weight of precious stones around one's neck, Sarah's bare throat marked her as unworthy of notice. "Sarah, quit your daydreaming and help me with these linens," called Mrs. Henderson, the stern proprietress of the boarding house. Sarah turned away from the window with a sigh, her simple cotton dress a stark contrast to the elaborate gowns she had been admiring. As fate would have it, Sarah's childhood friend Emma Whitmore arrived at the boarding house that very afternoon. Emma had married into wealth 2 years prior, and now lived in San Antonio with her cattle baron husband. She swept into the modest establishment like a whirlwind of silk and perfume, her sapphire necklace catching everyone's attention. "Sarah, darling," Emma exclaimed, though her smile seemed forced. "How wonderful to see you again. I'm in town for the ball, naturally." The 2 women embraced, but Sarah couldn't help noticing how Emma's eyes swept over her plain appearance with barely concealed pity. They sat in the small parlor, where Emma regaled Sarah with tales of her luxurious life, each story emphasizing the jewels she had acquired and the important people she now associated with. "You know," Emma said carefully, "I might be able to arrange for you to attend the ball tonight. My husband knows the organizers quite well." Sarah's heart leaped with excitement. She had dreamed of attending such an elegant affair, of dancing and socializing with people beyond the confines of the boarding house. "Oh, Emma, would you really do that for me?" Emma's expression grew more calculating. "Well, there is just one small matter. You would need to look the part, you understand. The other ladies will all be wearing their finest jewelry. Perhaps you have some family pieces tucked away." Sarah's face fell. "I'm afraid I don't have anything like that, Emma. My mother's wedding ring is the only piece of jewelry I own." Emma's smile faded entirely. She glanced around the modest room, as if seeing it for the first time, her nose wrinkling slightly at the simple furnishings. "Oh dear, that simply won't do. You see, the Cattlemen's Ball isn't just any social gathering. It's where the most important families in Texas come to see and be seen. Without proper jewelry, without the right appearance, you would stand out terribly. People would talk." The rejection hit Sarah like a physical blow. "I see," she whispered, her cheeks burning with shame. "Please don't take it personally, darling," Emma continued, her voice taking on a patronizing tone. "It's just that reputation means everything in our social circle. I couldn't bear for people to think I associate with someone who can't afford to dress appropriately. It would reflect poorly on my husband's standing." Sarah stood up abruptly, her hands trembling. "I understand completely, Emma. Thank you for your honesty." Emma gathered her silk skirts and prepared to leave, seemingly oblivious to the hurt she had inflicted. "Perhaps next year, dear, if your circumstances improve." She paused at the door. "You know, there are some lovely positions available as ladies' maids in San Antonio. With your skills, you might find steady work serving someone of proper standing." After Emma departed in a cloud of expensive perfume, Sarah remained in the parlor, staring at her reflection in the small mirror on the wall. Her mother's simple gold wedding band caught the light on her finger, the only precious thing she owned. She touched her bare throat where diamonds and pearls should have rested, according to Emma's standards. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway, having overheard the entire conversation. "That woman's got more jewels than sense," she said gruffly. "Don't you pay her any mind, child," but the damage was done. Sarah excused herself and walked out into the evening air, needing to escape the suffocating feeling of unworthiness that had settled over her like a heavy blanket. The sounds of music and laughter drifted from the direction of the town hall, where the Cattlemen's Ball was already beginning. As she wandered the quiet streets, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if Emma was right. In a world that valued appearance over character, was she truly worthless without jewels to prove her worth? Sarah wandered through the dusty streets of Copper Ridge as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The sounds of fiddle music and laughter from the Cattlemen's ball grew fainter as she walked toward the outskirts of town, seeking solitude to nurse her wounded pride. Her feet carried her past the last of the wooden storefronts and toward the old creek that ran behind the town. The familiar path had been her refuge during childhood whenever the world felt too harsh or complicated. Tonight, it seemed like the only place where she could exist without judgment. The creek babbled softly in the twilight, its gentle sound usually bringing her peace. Sarah sat on a fallen log beside the water, removed her worn boots, and dipped her feet into the cool stream. She closed her eyes and tried to push away Emma's words, but they echoed in her mind like a persistent bell. Without proper jewelry, you would stand out terribly. People would talk. I couldn't bear for people to think I associate with someone who can't afford to dress appropriately. A tear slipped down Sarah's cheek, as she wondered if this was how the world would always see her. Would she forever be judged by what she lacked rather than what she possessed? Her character, her kindness, her intelligence, her capacity for hard work. Did none of that matter if she couldn't drape herself in diamonds? The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted her melancholy thoughts. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes and looked up to see a lone rider approaching along the creek path. In the fading light, she could make out the silhouette of a man on horseback, his hat tilted low over his face. The rider slowed his horse as he drew near, and Sarah instinctively moved to put her boots back on, embarrassed to be caught in such an informal state. But the stranger's voice was gentle when he spoke. "Evening, miss. I hope I'm not intruding on your solitude." Sarah looked up to see a tall man dismounting from a well-cared-for chestnut mare. He was dressed in practical clothes, worn leather chaps, a simple cotton shirt, and a weathered cowboy hat that had seen many seasons under the Texas sun. Despite his humble attire, there was something distinguished about his bearing, a quiet confidence that commanded respect without demanding it. "Not at all," Sarah replied, her voice still slightly shaky from her earlier tears. "I was just enjoying the evening air." The cowboy removed his hat, revealing dark hair and kind brown eyes that seemed to take in everything with careful attention. He was perhaps 30 years old, with the lean build and sun-weathered skin of a man who spent his days working outdoors. "Jake Morrison," he said, introducing himself with a slight nod. "I don't believe we've met, though I've seen you around town from time to time." "Sarah Mitchell," she responded, managing a small smile despite her emotional state. Jake's observant eyes noticed the traces of tears on her cheeks, though he was too much of a gentleman to comment directly. Instead, he gestured toward the creek. "This is a peaceful spot. I often come here myself when I need to think. Do you?" Sarah asked, curious despite herself. "I thought I was the only one who knew about this place." "Well, I reckon great minds think alike," Jake said with a warm smile that reached his eyes. "Mind if I water my horse? Belle here has had a long day." Sarah nodded, watching as Jake led his mare to the creek's edge. There was something soothing about his presence, a steadiness that seemed to calm the turbulent emotions that had been churning inside her. Unlike the people at the Cattlemen's ball, Jake didn't seem to be measuring her worth by her appearance or possessions. "I heard there's quite a celebration going on in town tonight," Jake said conversationally as Belle drank from the stream. "The Cattlemen's ball, if I'm not mistaken." Sarah's expression darkened slightly. "Yes, it's quite the grand affair. All the important people are there, dressed in their finest clothes and most expensive jewelry." Jake caught the bitter edge in her voice and studied her face more carefully. "You don't sound particularly impressed by all that grandeur." "I suppose I'm just not the type of person who belongs at such events," Sarah said, looking down at her hands. "According to some people, anyway." Jake finished tending to his horse and came to sit on a nearby rock, maintaining a respectful distance, but close enough for comfortable conversation. "And what type of person do they think belongs at such events?" "The kind with diamond necklaces and emerald earrings," Sarah replied, her voice heavy with disappointment. "The kind whose worth can be measured by the weight of precious stones around their neck." Jake was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "That's an interesting way to measure worth," he said finally, "though I can't say it makes much sense to me." Sarah looked up at him in surprise. "It doesn't?" "Well," Jake said, leaning forward slightly. "I've known plenty of folks who wore expensive jewelry and fine clothes, but couldn't be trusted to keep their word or show kindness to someone in need. And I've known others who didn't have two coins to rub together, but who possessed more integrity and compassion than all the wealthy socialites combined." His words stirred something in Sarah's chest, a warmth she hadn't felt since Emma's cruel rejection earlier that day. "That's a refreshing perspective, Mr. Morrison." "Jake, please," he corrected gently. "And it's not just perspective, Miss Mitchell, it's experience. In my line of work, you learn pretty quickly that a person's character matters a lot more than their bank account." "What line of work is that?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious about this thoughtful stranger who seemed so different from the shallow people she had encountered at the boarding house. Jake smiled, and Sarah noticed how it transformed his entire face, making him appear younger and more approachable. "I'm a rancher, among other things. Been working cattle most of my life, traveling from ranch to ranch, helping where I'm needed." As they continued talking, Sarah felt her spirits lifting for the first time all day. Here was someone who seemed to value the same things she did, someone who looked beyond surface appearances to see what really mattered. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, Sarah found herself opening up to Jake Morrison in a way she hadn't expected. There was something about his genuine interest and non-judgmental demeanor that made her feel safe to share her thoughts and experiences. "I suppose I sound terribly bitter," Sarah said, drawing patterns in the dirt with a small stick she had picked up. "It's just that I've always believed that a person's character should matter more than their possessions. But today, I learned that not everyone shares that view." Jake listened intently as Sarah recounted her encounter with Emma, though she was careful not to speak too harshly of her former friend. Even in her hurt, Sarah's natural kindness prevented her from being truly vindictive. "This friend of yours," Jake said thoughtfully when she finished her story, "she sounds like someone who's forgotten what real friendship means. True friends don't abandon each other based on social standing or material possessions." "Perhaps," Sarah sighed. "But she made valid points about fitting into certain social circles. Maybe I am naive to think that character alone is enough in this world." Jake stood up and walked to the creek's edge, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed at the water reflecting the moonlight. "You know, I've had the opportunity to observe many different kinds of people in my travels. Ranch owners, cattle barons, town officials, working folks, and everyone in between." He turned back to face Sarah, his expression serious but warm. "And I can tell you with absolute certainty that the most memorable people I've met weren't necessarily the ones wearing the fanciest clothes or the most expensive jewelry. They were the ones who showed genuine kindness, who could be relied upon in difficult times, who treated everyone with respect, regardless of their station in life." Sarah felt her heart flutter at his words. "You really believe that? I've seen wealthy women who couldn't spare a kind word for their own servants. And I've seen working women who would give their last piece of bread to a hungry stranger," Jake continued, walking back toward her. "Which one do you think has more worth as a human being?" "The one with compassion, of course," Sarah answered without hesitation. "Exactly," Jake said, settling back onto his rock. "And from what I can observe in our brief conversation, you possess more genuine compassion and intelligence than most of the jewel-wearing ladies at that ball tonight." Sarah felt her cheeks warm at his compliment, but before she could respond, the sound of approaching voices interrupted their conversation. Through the trees, they could see torches moving along the main path that led from town toward the ranches beyond. "Sounds like some folks from the ball are heading home," Jake observed, standing to get a better look. As the group drew nearer, Sarah recognized Emma's distinctive laugh among the voices. Her heart sank as she realized her former friend was part of the group, likely traveling with other wealthy families back to their accommodations at one of the larger ranches outside town. "We should probably head back," Sarah said quietly, not wanting to risk another uncomfortable encounter with Emma. But before they could move, the group had spotted them by the creek. Emma's voice rang out across the evening air, sharp with surprise and something else. Disapproval. "Sarah, what on earth are you doing out here at this hour?" Emma approached with 3 other couples, all dressed in their ball finery. The women's jewelry glittered even in the torchlight, and their elaborate gowns rustled with each step. The men wore fine suits with gold watch chains and polished boots that had never seen a day's real work. "Good evening, Emma," Sarah replied with as much dignity as she could muster, acutely aware of her simple dress and bare neck in contrast to the group's opulent appearance. Emma's eyes quickly took in Jake's presence, and her expression grew even more disapproving. "And who might this be?" she asked, her tone suggesting she had already formed an unfavorable opinion. Jake stepped forward with natural courtesy, removing his hat. "Jake Morrison, ma'am. I was just watering my horse, and happened upon Miss Mitchell enjoying the evening by the creek." One of the men in Emma's group, a portly gentleman with an impressive moustache and an even more impressive diamond stickpin, looked Jake up and down with obvious disdain. "Morrison? Can't say I'm familiar with that name. What's your business in Copper Ridge?" "I'm in the cattle business, sir," Jake replied politely, though Sarah noticed a slight tension in his shoulders. The man snorted dismissively. "A drifting cowhand, I suppose. Well, you'd better be moving along. This area belongs to respectable folks." Sarah felt her temper flare at the man's rudeness, but Jake remained calm and composed. "Actually, sir, this is public land by the creek, but I certainly don't want to inconvenience anyone." Emma stepped closer to Sarah, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a private whisper, but was clearly audible to everyone present. "Really, Sarah, what are you thinking? Associating with strange men by the creek at night? People will talk." "There's nothing inappropriate happening here, Emma," Sarah replied firmly, surprised by her own boldness. "Of course not," Emma said with false sweetness. "But appearances matter, darling, especially for someone in your position. You can't afford to damage your reputation further." The implied insult hung in the air like a physical blow. Sarah felt her face burn with humiliation, not for herself, but for the cruelty of Emma's words in front of strangers. Jake's jaw tightened, and he took a step closer to the group. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried an unmistakable authority that made everyone pay attention. "Ma'am, I believe you owe Miss Mitchell an apology." Emma laughed, a brittle sound that echoed off the water. "An apology? I think you're overstepping your bounds, cowboy." "No, ma'am," Jake said, his brown eyes now hard as flint. "I think you're the one who's overstepped. Miss Mitchell is a lady deserving of respect, regardless of what jewelry she does or doesn't wear." The tension in the group was palpable as they realized this was no ordinary drifting cowhand. There was something in Jake's bearing, in the quiet confidence of his words, that suggested he was accustomed to being taken seriously. The confrontation by the creek had reached a boiling point. Emma and her companions stood in shocked silence as Jake's words hung in the air. The portly gentleman with the diamond stickpin puffed up his chest, clearly unused to being challenged by someone he considered beneath his social station. "Now see here, young man," the gentleman blustered. "I don't know who you think you are, but you're addressing your betters. Mrs. Whitmore is the wife of one of the most prominent cattle barons in San Antonio." Jake's expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Is that so?" he said mildly. "And which ranch would that be?" Emma lifted her chin proudly. "The Whitmore Ranch, of course. My husband owns 10,000 acres and runs the largest cattle operation in 3 counties. "Interesting," Jake replied, his tone conversational. "I know the Whitmore place well. Fine operation, though I believe it's actually closer to 8,000 acres. And the largest operation in the county would be the Morrison spread." The group exchanged glances, confused by Jake's specific knowledge of local ranching operations. Emma's husband had always boasted about having the largest ranch, and she had never questioned the claim. "Morrison," the portly gentleman repeated, his voice losing some of its bluster. "You said your name was Morrison." "That's right," Jake confirmed, still maintaining his calm demeanor. One of the other women in the group, an elderly lady with an elaborate pearl choker, gasped suddenly. "Morrison? You don't mean the Morrison Ranch? The one owned by—" "Jake Morrison," Jake finished for her. "That would be me." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's face went through a series of color changes, from pale to red to nearly purple. The Morrison Ranch was legendary in Texas cattle circles, a massive operation spanning over 15,000 acres, known for producing the finest cattle in the state. More importantly, Jake Morrison was one of the wealthiest and most respected ranchers in all of Texas. Sarah stared at Jake in amazement. The humble, thoughtful man she had been talking with for the past hour was actually one of the most powerful men in the county, yet he had been content to sit by the creek, talking with her as if they were equals. But you're dressed like a common cowhand," Emma stammered. her carefully constructed social awareness crumbling. Jake looked down at his practical work clothes and shrugged. I was checking on my cattle before coming to town. Seemed foolish to change clothes just to water my horse by the creek. The portly gentleman, who had been so quick to dismiss Jake moments earlier, was now practically bowing. Mr. Morrison, sir, I had no idea. Please forgive my rudeness. I'm Harold Pemberton, president of the Copper Ridge Bank. Jake nodded politely, but didn't seem particularly impressed by the man's sudden change in attitude. Mr. Pemberton. Emma was frantically trying to recover her social standing. Jake. May I call you Jake? We simply must get properly acquainted. I had no idea you were the Jake Morrison. You absolutely must come to dinner when you're in San Antonio. My husband would be thrilled to meet you. Sarah watched this transformation with a mixture of fascination and disgust. These same people who had been treating Jake with disdain moments earlier were now fawning over him simply because they had learned of his wealth and status. But Jake's response surprised everyone. That's very kind of you, Mrs. Whitmore, but I'm afraid I couldn't accept hospitality from someone who treats others poorly based on their appearance or perceived social standing. Emma's face fell. I don't understand. Jake gestured towards Sarah. You insulted Miss Mitchell simply because she doesn't wear expensive jewelry. You suggested she was somehow less worthy of respect because of her circumstances. That kind of behavior tells me everything I need to know about your character. But surely you understand the importance of maintaining proper social standards, Emma protested weakly. I understand the importance of treating people with basic human dignity, Jake replied firmly. And I understand that a person's worth isn't determined by what they can afford to wear around their neck. He turned to Sarah, his expression softening. Miss Mitchell, would you allow me to escort you back to town? I'd consider it an honor. Sarah felt her heart soar at his words. I would like that very much, Mr. Morrison. Jake, he corrected gently, offering her his arm. As they prepared to leave, Jake addressed the stunned group one final time. You folks might want to think about what really matters in life. I found that the most beautiful jewels in the world can't make up for an ugly heart. Emma and her companions watched in shocked silence as Jake helped Sarah onto his horse before mounting behind her. As they rode away toward town, Sarah could hear the group erupting into frantic whispers behind them. I can't believe you did that, Sarah said softly as they rode through the moonlit landscape. Did what? Jake asked, his arm steady around her waist to keep her secure on the horse. Defended me. Put them in their place. You could have just revealed who you were from the beginning and avoided all the unpleasantness. Jake was quiet for a moment, considering her words. If I had done that, I would have learned nothing about their true character. And more importantly, I would have missed the opportunity to meet the most genuinely remarkable woman I've encountered in years. Sarah's breath caught at his words. You can't possibly mean that. Miss Sarah Mitchell, Jake said, his voice warm and sincere. You are worth more than all their diamonds and emeralds combined. Your kindness, your intelligence, your strength of character, those are treasures that can't be bought or worn around someone's neck. As they rode toward the twinkling lights of Copper Ridge, Sarah realized that this extraordinary evening had changed everything. She had started the day feeling worthless and rejected, but she was ending it feeling valued and cherished by a man whose opinion mattered more than all the social approval in the world. The ride back to town was magical for Sarah. Sitting in front of Jake on his horse, Belle, she felt safe and valued in a way she had never experienced before. The moonlight illuminated the path ahead, and the gentle rhythm of the horse's gait created an intimacy that allowed for quiet conversation. I still can't quite believe what happened back there, Sarah said, leaning slightly back against Jake's steady presence, the way their entire demeanor changed the moment they learned your name. Jake's chuckle rumbled through his chest. Unfortunately, it's not the first time I've witnessed that kind of behavior. It's one of the reasons I often prefer to keep my identity private when I first meet people. It allows me to see who they really are beneath the social masks. Is that why you were dressed so simply tonight? Sarah asked. Partly, Jake admitted. I had been working with my cattle all day, checking on a pregnant mare in the far pasture. When I decided to ride into town, I saw no reason to change clothes just to observe the festivities from a distance. I never intended to attend the ball itself. Sarah turned slightly to look at him. You weren't planning to attend? But surely you received an invitation. Everyone of importance in the county was invited. Sarah looked up into his honest brown eyes and saw nothing but sincerity there. This remarkable man, who could have any woman he wanted, was choosing her, not despite her humble circumstances, but because of the person those circumstances had helped her become. "I feel like I'm in a dream," she admitted. "Like I'm going to wake up tomorrow and discover this was all my imagination." Jake smiled, and that smile transformed his entire face with warmth and joy. "Then I'll have to make sure tomorrow is even better than tonight, so you'll know it's all real." He walked her to the door of the boarding house, where Mrs. Henderson was peering through the curtains with obvious curiosity. "Until tomorrow, then," Jake said, taking her hand and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Sleep well, Sarah Mitchell." As Sarah watched him mount his horse and ride away into the night, she knew that her life had just changed forever. The woman who had been rejected that afternoon for lacking jewels was now being courted by one of the most eligible men in Texas. And it had nothing to do with diamonds or emeralds, and everything to do with the treasures she carried within her heart.